Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Josh, and I was riding home today, and I was listening to a YouTube video by Dr. Hugh Ross, and while I know that Dr. Ross is a brilliant scientist in his own right, listening to him talk about the early portion of the book of Genesis, I just kept thinking to myself, please stop translating. And so this is sort of a spur of the moment thing, but I came home and put some notes together to sort of do a quick critique of one of the videos, and it seems like it's a pretty consistent presentation of his views on the book of Genesis and how one should interpret it. And I want to use it sort of as a case to demonstrate how one should not use their linguistic abilities, particularly when they're in the process of learning a foreign language, in particular an ancient language, something like Hebrew or Greek or Sumerian or Akkadian. This is exactly what you should not be doing. So given that this weekend we're starting with our Sumerian class, and we will probably do in the future a Hebrew class, maybe even a Greek class online, I think this stuff needs to come out early. When not to translate, when not to assert things from your knowledge, your limited knowledge of an ancient text. So that's what I'm calling this. Please stop translating, how Hugh Ross gets the Hebrew wrong in Genesis 1. So I'm going to give you some just clear examples of errors that you will easily see. These are not errors that he makes, by the way. I want to show some more overt errors that people have made in the past, or maybe not have made, but could make, something that you would see that would make sense very quickly. So Genesis 33:13, but he said to him, my Lord knows that the children are weak, and the flocks and cattle that are nursing are with me. And if they drive them hard one day, all the flock will die. Well, everybody knows that the word drive there, is to move the flock along, right? To take a stick or your voice, whatever, and go behind them and drive them forward, right? That's one meaning of the word drive. But there are other meanings in English today of the word drive, and you certainly wouldn't read those back into the Hebrew text. Otherwise, you'd get something like this, right? And thank you, Megan, for putting this together. Vroom, vroom, I'm driving the flock, right? That's a neat little steering wheel. No, of course not. We wouldn't. This wouldn't make any sense. We wouldn't read a modern meaning of a particular English word back into the Hebrew, even though we've translated using that English word, right? It has a semantic range. So drive can mean to drive a car, but it can mean to drive cattle. You can't mix those up. 1 Kings 17:13, and Elijah said to her, do not be afraid. Go, do as you said. However, make from it a small cake for me first, and bring it to me. Then make some afterward for yourself and for your son. Well, the word cake here, ugah in Hebrew, clearly in this context means like a small loaf, but they use the word cake to translate that because that's in the semantic range of the word ugah. But that doesn't mean that we would take a modern understanding of the word cake and read it back into the Hebrew text and have Elijah there singing happy birthday to me. Right? That doesn't make any sense. And we all understand that. And again, I'm not saying that Dr. Ross made either of these mistakes. These are just clear examples of taking a modern, a word that we translate from the Hebrew into the English and taking something a bit based on one semantic range, one part of the meaning of the word, and then taking that same English word that has a different meaning and reading that back into the text. Let me show you how he does this. And I call it error number 1, reading modern meanings back into ancient texts. So, the word universe, and This is the first thing they said, please stop translating. Just please, you have to learn Hebrew. You just have to learn Hebrew before you can translate. So the English has several meanings for the word universe. One of them is the created world, right? When we talk about the universe, one of the ways that we use that word is we talk about everything that's been created, right? The created world. And I say that assuming creation, right? But the world that exists, I suppose, may be a better way to say that. So this is the sense in which we translate, quote, the heavens and the earth, this Hebrew phrase that he keeps saying, and he mispronounces it, and it's just, I would have a very difficult time believing he knows Hebrew. But et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So the heavens and the earth. Of course, these have the direct object marker because that's how they appear. But anyhow, as the universe. So when they say here, when God began to create the heavens and the earth in Genesis 1:1, this is the sense. It's like all that he created, right? In that sense, it's the universe. But you cannot then go to the other English meanings of the word universe, including things like all existing matter, including time, space, and energy, and somehow read all of that meaning, that scientific meaning, back into the phrase the heavens and the earth. It just doesn't work, right? This is an interpretive fallacy. You can't read modern meanings, current meanings, back into, particularly scientific meanings, back into Hebrew words, because we're translating based on a very narrow semantic meaning. And let me prove it to you. And this is just one place that you could go, because again, I'm kind of slapping this together quickly, but it doesn't take long to put something like this together. Exodus 20, verse 11. This is just how they use the phrase the heavens and the earth. Because in 6 days the Lord made, look, the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. There's no hint that the totality of all existing matter, including time, space, and energy, is meant here, and then to tack on and the sea. I mean, it just doesn't make it. That's not what it means, and you can tell that from the sentence itself, from the line itself, because what's indicated here is the heavens, that which is above them, the earth, what's there, and then the sea, the rest of the water. Right? I mean, I think a cursory reading of this would tell you that. Certainly, this doesn't have anything to do with energy and the time-space continuum, or any of that stuff. It's just this very basic understanding of the created world. In fact, world might be a better way of rendering that phrase. But anyway, universe, just you can't carry that scientific meaning into this. Okay, enough said about that. If you want more verses, please let me know, and I can provide you more. But suffice it to say, I think this is sufficient to show that you can't read the scientific meaning of universe back into Genesis 1. So, interpretive error number 2, reading into the text what you want it to say so that your argument works, right? And this just happens over and over and over again in this particular video. And it's a recent video, I think. I think it was put together this year. I could be wrong about that. Maybe that's when it went up. I don't know. Anyhow. But he says over and over again, the Bible got it right. The Bible got it 100% accurate in its scientific, the way that it scientifically puts together the epochs or the long periods of time and the order in which they're created. The problem is that the text doesn't say what he wants it to say. So, for example, in Genesis 1:14, and God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens." This is called the jussive form, Yehi. And it has this idea of, like, it's a pronouncement that creates something, right? And the jussive is used in this sense several times in Genesis 1. It's not just with the verb haya, to be. It's I think it's used 3 other times. Or with 2 other verbs. I'd have to check that, but several other times in Genesis 1. But his interpretation does not allow for light to be created at this time or in this place, in this particular part of the sequence. So he reinterprets this Hebrew phrase, let it be, to not mean to make or to create, right? It's like it was already in existence and it just lets it, this is the time when light is able to come through the clouds, the thick cloud layer, and he goes to Job to try to show that. The problem is that the very next verse, 2 verses later, verse 16, says, so God made the lights, asa, and it definitively means to make something, right? There are 2 Hebrew words that show up a lot in Genesis 1, bara and asa, and there's been a lot of ink spilled over the difference between these two. Bara seems to be more of a divine act. I think that's pretty well established. I haven't done a thorough research into it, but just from the reading that I've done, I mean that seems to fit. John Walton, in his book, I can't remember the title now, but made this argument. Not that I would say I would stand on everything he says, but I mean certainly he has a basis for distinguishing bara and asa. The problem is that the distinction that he's making is somewhat of a subtle distinction. It has to do with organization, if I remember correctly, but both of them mean to create, right? And but to say that the phrase "let there be" doesn't mean to create flies directly in the face of verse 16, and in fact, it flies in the face of Psalm 104:19. Which uses this, it's a creative act there, talking about the moon, these lights that were created, and it says that the moon was created for seasons, which connects directly to verse 14. That argument seemed like it would be a lot easier to understand when I typed it in. It seems less so now. Don't worry about that so much. But look at Psalm 136. Again, these are creation passages that clearly show that the lights were created, right? They were made. At this juncture, they didn't just. They're not the light that exists and had existed isn't being allowed through the clouds. Yeah, that doesn't mean that there's this. Well, anyway, so you can't just reinterpret Hebrew or any language for that matter to try to make it fit your interpretation. There may be difficulties in the passage, but you can't just assert that, let there be here, this means it doesn't create. You can't say that because it most certainly does. And those types of assertions really can confuse people and make it very difficult to move forward interpretively here and to understand it. But the thing is, if you don't know Hebrew, it's very easy to trust somebody, particularly because he has a PhD. His PhD is in something else, but he's an authority, like a scientific authority, and so it's very easy to say, well, he's an authority here, he must be an authority in everything. It's just not the case. So interpretive error number 2: you can't make the Hebrew say what you want it to say just because you might be able to make it make some sense in the English. It doesn't work that way. So how do we avoid these types of mistakes? And again, I have to emphasize, I have a lot of respect for Dr. Ross, right? As a scientist, I mean, clearly he seems, I'm not a scientist myself, so it's hard for me to evaluate that sort of thing. But I mean, he does seem to know a lot of what he's talking about, but certainly not in this area. And there are ways that if you decide that you're going to begin to dabble or to start learning these languages, there's a way that you can avoid these types of mistakes. Number 1, these are my translation suggestions, right? When you start studying a new language, learn the vocabulary, the grammar, and the syntax well. For those of you that are going to be studying Sumerian with me, I'm going to provide you the instruction and the resources to take care of this first step. And it's not an incredibly fast process. I think it'll be faster than you probably anticipate, but nonetheless, it takes time, right? So you have to learn that stuff well as a basic, as a foundational practice. Number 2, once you learn those things, read as widely as you can in the language. One of the things that can really, really help you in learning a new language, particularly an ancient one, is that you try to read from all the different genres and you try to get as much of it under your belt as you can. Because there are two ways that you can translate, right? There's translating very deeply, which is really important, particularly to learn this vocabulary, grammar, and syntax. But it's also important to read widely so that you can see how the language works broadly in many different genres, many different contexts. Be patient, and I have to emphasize this, and it sucks, I'm sure, for many people to hear this, but be humble. Don't try to assert things too early. Look, we all want to come to a new language and go, aha! There was a meme that came out, or a cartoon that I saw years ago, and it was a pastor, a cartoon of a pastor standing up at the pulpit, and he said, 20 PhDs with 50 combined degrees, and 70 years or something, 150 years of translation experience have translated this verse this way, but today I'm going to tell you what the Greek really says. And you want to facepalm when you see stuff like that, because you think, okay, do you really know Greek that well that you can say all these translators that have wrestled with this problem passage for all these years, none of them knew what they were talking about? I know actually what the answer is. And you'll find, I have found in my experience, that the people that make these types of assertions that are either absolutely brilliant in the language, they've mastered it, they've been reading it for years and years and years, or they're brand new to it. Be patient and humble. Take your time. And if you do, and I'd say when you do, because we all do, if we work in languages long enough, we come up with something that's new or innovated. That's the whole point of scholarship. Check your conclusions with a reputable scholar in the field. I cannot emphasize that enough, particularly in the early going. You find something that you think is new, or you read some article from 100 years ago and you say, oh my gosh, we just missed this. Run that by somebody. Chances are it's been disproven, right? And so you don't want to go falling into that trap of relying on old scholarship that people have dealt with already. So learn the language, read widely, be patient and humble, and when you do find something new and innovated, check your conclusions with people that know in the field. So let me conclude with this. I'd like all of us to join HAPS, which is an organization that I just formed called Humans Against Poor Scholarship. Translate responsibly.